this video so I can share the technique I use for applying a new gel coat of polyurethane to my carbon Kevlar Galasports whitewater kayak and to the paddle blades for the Galasports paddle. I'll share a few pictures of what the final product looked like after the project, and then I'll go into a description of the detailed process. So I'm really happy with the way it came out. This is after 3 layers of the 2-part polyurethane. It's really like glass on top. You can see little scratches underneath the surface. That's where rocks had gone through the previous polyurethane coating and then grazed the carbon Kevlar core. But it's really cosmetics, but the core of the boat still has really good integrity. That's really what I was expecting to come out of the project. And then the paddle blades came out really well. I'm going to show the lines of where the polyurethane ends. So I went up to the border here for the polyurethane, and then I went up just above the lettering. It's about 4 inches below the bottom on the sides. And then I move over to the sides of the kayak to the polyurethane tapers. And the next time I do a project like this in a year or two, I'm just gonna go ahead and go all the way up to the border. So I'll do the complete bottom and the complete sides. I'm really happy with the way this one turned out though. This is the process I use for applying a new gel coat of polyurethane to my kayak. So you can look at these photos here, and this is some of the before and after. Over here on the far right, it's a kayak loaded up on top of my car. You can see all the scratches in the gel coat. They look kind of whitish, tannish. And then the second picture from the right with the kayak on the carpet there, that's with the new 3 layers of polyurethane on there, and it's just like glass with no more scratches in the gel coat. And the middle picture is, it's the same thing, the 3 new coats of polyurethane, and that's also the paddle blade. And on the far left, the far left one is the paddle blade after 1 coat of poly, and then the one next to it that's scratched up is the paddle before any new poly after sanding. So it's a little smoother, but it still looks scuffed up. So this is the contents of the presentation, and we'll just go through it step by step. Again, this is the before and after. So there was about, really 200 or 300 little scratches in the gel coat from just bumping into rocks on the Potomac River, and was able to get out 100% of the scratches, and there's just this little residual scratch in the carbon Kevlar core, but the integrity of the boat is still 100%. If there had been any damage to the core, then I would have repaired that first, but there was no need to. And the paddle blades came out really nicely. I was really happy with those because that's something I look at when I'm paddling all the time. So it's pretty neat. And you can see how I applied tape over the logos there. It's just something to keep in mind. The polyurethane can melt the plastic in the logos, and also it may peel off of the sticker. So you want to make sure to tape up your stickers if you want to keep them. So materials I used were the EPIFANES polyurethane clear gloss. I bought it from Jamestown Distributors, which is part of the company called Total Boat. We did a lot of research with different companies and products, and I feel like this is the best polyurethane on the planet. And the 2-part makes it much stronger than a 1-part polyurethane, and the technique is to use 3 layers and sand between layers. Or you could apply the 2nd and 3rd layer without sanding if you put it on about 24 hours after coating. I used an EPIFANES brand foam roller. You could also use a brush, a sprayer, or other brand rollers. And then I used 10% EPIFANES polyurethane paint thinner. They call it brush thinner. And I bought those online at JamestownDistributors.com. And then I bought some materials at the hardware store, 3 paint rollers, sandpaper 220 and 320 grit, the multi-surface frog tape. I used that for the edges of where I was painting and to protect any areas that did not want to get poly on. And then I bought 3 1-pint mixing cups. The mixing cups help a lot because if you put the resin inside a cup that reacts to the solvent, it can make your resin more cloudy and not look as good. So first, thank you to Fabien Lefebvre. He's the one who introduced me to slalom kayaks and let me borrow his kayak once on the Potomac and did several lessons with him for slalom kayaking. He's a great teacher. And this is his website, Quantum Coaching Healing. Thank you to Ashley Nee. She's a great kayaking teacher and also great at doing repair of kayaks. And her school is Valley Mill Kayaks. That's the link to her school. Then thank you to Jennifer Hearn, who's another great kayaker, and she has a company with her husband, Davey, doing sweet composites. I bought some repair materials from her, and thanks to Paul Hyde at Total Boat, who gave me advice on the different properties of polyurethane brands and different materials to use, and some really nuances about preparing the boat for applying the polyurethane. So the steps I used for this project were, first I just put my boat up on a couple of sawhorses with a microfiber cloth between the boat and the sawhorses so I didn't scuff it up. And then I sanded the area with 220 grit sandpaper where I planned to re-gel it. Then I washed it off with water. You could just wipe it off with a cloth, but I wasn't in a hurry, so I washed it off with water, dried it with a cloth, and then I let it dry just to make sure there was no remaining water. Then I applied the first layer of polyurethane. So I taped up the area where I wanted to be the edge of the polyurethane. In this picture here, you can see how on the far left and the far right, near the stern and the bow, there's about a 2-inch green area there, a gap where paint. In the later coats, I moved the tape down to that black line. So I covered more of the boat in further layers. I personally would just recommend doing the complete sides and the bottom, below, in this picture it'd be above the black line, but on the bottom half of the boat. We have to make sure if there's any stickers or decals to tape them up or to remove them so it doesn't react with the polyurethane and then cause it to peel off later. So for my first layer, I used 2.5 ounces of hardener, 5 ounces resin, 1 ounce thinner, which came out to be 9 ounces of liquid total. Let it sit for 10 minutes while stirring, and then I put it into a roller container and then just rolled it onto the kayak, and then wiped off excess along the tape there, so that way if it does drip further, it gives it room to drip onto the tape without creating a little river of resin. Then after 2 hours, I removed the tape, then I let it dry for 48 hours. Created a little bubbles. I called to ask the store where I had bought it from, Jamestown Distributors, why there was bubbles, and didn't have a lot to say, but I personally think what caused my bubbles was I rolled over some areas 4 or 5 times. I feel like you shouldn't roll over an area more than twice, and you shouldn't use a dry roller, or that can actually create bubbles. But it wasn't a problem. Afterwards, I just waited 48 hours, I just was able to sand out the bubbles and it was no problem. So for the second layer, 48 hours later, I sanded off the air bubbles with the 320 grit sandpaper. So I'm only sanding about 10% of the boat at this point, just where I saw bubbles or blemishes. Then I taped it up again, mixed the poly just like I did in the first step. That formula was great. And then rolled it on. And this time I did the roll and tip method, where you roll and then you take your brush with a little bit of poly on it and you brush backwards to help smooth it out. Trial and error, I actually did not like that technique. I felt like it actually created more pools of resin. For me, it wasn't a good technique. It was really hot with the second layer. It was about 90 degrees out, so I just let it dry for 1 hour and removed the tape, and I let it dry for 24 hours, and then I was ready for the next step. If it had been colder, like 72 degrees or something like that, then I would have waited a full 48 hours before going to the next step, or even longer. For the third layer, I sanded just some very small areas, about 5% of the project, where I saw some drip marks. Again, I taped it up, mixed the poly like I had in the first two steps, and then I rolled it on without tipping, and I made sure only to not go over an area more than twice, two at the max, so it'd kind of be overlapping with my rollers. And then sometimes I would see a spot that looked like it didn't get enough poly, so then I would polyurethane resin, then I would put it in the rolling container again and add a little more. Let it dry for 1 hour, then I removed the tape, waited 24 hours. I felt like it was completely done, and then still want to wait a few more days to let it fully cure, and then I was ready for the final step. And so the process for working on the paddle was the exact same steps. So as I did one layer on the kayak, I also did a layer on the paddle blades, and just I'll mention it more in detail a little bit more later in lessons learned, but definitely want to put tape over any stickers or lettering that's not painted onto the paddle, because the polyurethane can melt stickers, and it can also cause the polyurethane to flake off and just look bad. Either have to remove the stickers or put safe on them. So I did another step where I refurbished the black edge on the kayak. If you look in earlier photos and videos, there's an edge, this little black, looks like a racing stripe that goes along the side, both sides of the kayak. And it acts like a seam cover, but also it's a little bit of a bumper that was starting to flake off on my kayak and turn yellow. So I sanded it down. So step two is I gently sanded it down to remove some epoxy flaking. But then that's being careful to not hurt the paint. And then I mixed up some epoxy, a different material than the polyurethane, and I used one called liquid diamonds. But for this particular project, I feel like any type of epoxy would work. But if I were going to be repairing the core of the kayak, I would use more of a marine focused epoxy. I added a little bit of black powder to 3 ounces of epoxy. I had some shungite powder, and then I brushed it along both of the black stripes. And then I also had taped up the area above and below it. And then after I applied the epoxy, I wiped it down on both sides. Then after about 35 minutes, the epoxy was already pretty well dried. It was curing because of the high temperature outside, 90 degrees. And then I let the boat just sit for a few days and try not to ding it up or bang it, because the materials on the boat are still soft for a few days. So here's some lessons I learned. You want to make sure to clean your work area really well to remove any dust. You want to have really good ventilation. It's recommended to wear a respirator when working with polyurethane. I had an open garage, open window, and a floor fan, so I felt okay without it. But if you're sensitive sinuses or allergies, you would want to either use a respirator or perhaps not do the project at all. And then just pause for a second. There was some noise in the background. So you want to use a drop cloth or a drop sheet of some type. I used a 9x12 plastic sheet. I found it helpful wearing some medical gloves or cleaning gloves that I just bought at Home Depot. I had a pack of 10 pairs. That if you get resin on your hands, it's really hard to get it off. And then just a reminder to retape each layer. You can't leave the tape on for more than 2 hours, or it can permanently adhere to the tape, and you'd have to sand it to get it off. So I applied tape 3 different times. And then after you put on the tape, you want to press it really hard so that it's not, so it's got a really solid feel. You want it to be able to stop the liquid resin from leaking through. And then after you've put on all of the resin for a layer, you want to clean the tape some. You wipe it off with either paper towel or some cotton cloth or something. I like to use old ripped up t-shirts. I'll use scissors to cut them up. And then for cleaning your hands, I clean them with dish soap, and then I wash them off and then put on a little hand lotion, and then that takes care of it for me. When you're doing the project, take your time. You can't rush art. Avoid melting anything underneath the polyurethane. Again, don't put it on top of a sticker or letters that have been sticked on your kayak. You want to put either tape over that area or just remove those items, because it'll create an issue. So what I'll do different next time, I'll cover more of the sides. I'll fully go up to that black line, because where I have some lettering on the kayak, it was painted on, and my sense is that it's compatible with the polyurethane gel coat. I sometimes turned off my floor fan. I would keep the floor fan going the whole time next time when I'm working, and then if I'm leaving the room for a while, or to let it dry for 24 hours, then I'll turn the fan off. I might start working with pigments next time, where I use the RAL color codes used by the manufacturer for Gallosport to match the color. Then I will do a little better job using the roller, and I'll apply a little more light coating of resin on the roller at all times, so I'm not using a dry roller, which sometimes can suck up some of the resin and then make it affects the sheen, where you can have one area that's more shiny, one area that's less shiny. So it just takes practice. And this was the workspace I used. There also was a fan there, and then I had the window cracked. It's a little different, but that's just what it looked like. And just a few pictures of me on the Potomac River having fun kayaking. And here's some of my information. You can go to scottholiday.com, use my contact form to reach me, or friend me on Facebook, and that's also my YouTube channel.